All right, so let's use the other side of the vacuum packer, and that's vacuum packing jars. The machine has a knob here with a picture of a bag and a picture of a jar, so make sure that the indicator is in fact pointed toward jars. So now, instead of pulling the air out of the nozzle, the machine's going to be pulling air out of the jar sealer port over on the left-hand deck here. So when you're vacuum packing in a jar, it's a very simple matter of finding a seal, putting it on top of the jar, putting the jar sealer on top of it. And your VacUpack does come complete with a jar sealer. Plug it in, and activate the pump. Now, some people use marshmallows to demonstrate this. I find packing peanuts are just as much fun. They both expand as you draw the vacuum inside the jar. The indicator will go from red to green to tell you when you've sucked all the air out of the jar. Uncork it, and the atmospheric pressure is what holds the lid in place. So another thing that people ask us when we're vacuum packing is what to do with their cookies, crackers, cereals. And the jar is an excellent answer because these are generally products that you open and close on a regular basis. If you can't reseal the bag just by itself, I find putting things like crackers or snack crackers, the nuts around the holidays that you use, into a jar is a great place to put them. This will allow you to vacuum pack inside of a jar without having the bag or the atmospheric pressure actually crush the jar. Now, I'm going to use the same lid we used earlier. Another nice thing is these lids can be used hundreds of times. Plug it in, turn the indicator from bags to jars, so remember that the indicator needs to be pointing at what you're doing. Activate the pump, and this will lift the lid up off the jar just enough to sweep the air out from underneath it. And unlike a bag material, the jars don't collapse. So the indicator is going to tell you when you have extracted all of the air that you're going to from the jar. Make sure you uncork the jar sealer from the hose. That atmospheric pressure will slap the lid down, and that will give you a vacuum packed jar to keep your cookies or crackers fresh until next use. Okay, so another thing people like to vacuum pack is strawberries. They have a very short season and they go bad very quickly in your refrigerator. I find that if you vacuum pack fresh strawberries, they will stay fresh in a jar for about 10 days when you put them in your refrigerator. So we're going to place a few of them in this jar and show you how to vacuum pack them into a jar. I also like to vacuum pack them into a bag. However, when I do in a bag, I like to pre-freeze them a little bit so that they do hold their structure a little bit. Now, when you put them into a jar, make sure that the jar has enough capacity for what you're doing. Put the jar sealer on top. Plug one end of the hose into the machine, plug the other end into the jar sealer. So when you do a jar, make sure that your indicator is turned from bags to jars. Activate the pump and let the machine lift the lid up off the top of the jar and watch the gauge, because the gauge is going to tell you when the air has been evacuated from the jar. As soon as it goes from red to green, turn off the machine and uncork the jar sealer. The atmospheric pressure has sealed the lid against the jar, and those strawberries will stay fresh in a jar in your refrigerator for about 10 days. Peanuts, walnuts, almonds, and cashews are something that come in jars when you buy them. And especially peanuts, they're probably the most famous thing out there. They all say vacuum packed for freshness on them. And they have an expiration date, which is usually anywhere from a year to 6 months away. So anytime that you open up one of these jars, just listen for that sound of freshness. Eat what you want. And the next time you want to put the peanuts away, just pour them into one of your jars. Put the lid on top of the jar. Put your lid on top of the jar. And put the jar sealer on top of that. Once again, plug the jar hose into the jar sealer port and to the jar sealer. And remember to turn the indicator from your bag port to your jar port. activate the pump and let the machine lift the lid up off the jar, sweep the air out from underneath it. Keep an eye on your gauge so that you know when to turn the machine off. Simply lift up on the handle and uncork the jar sealer. The atmospheric pressure will keep those peanuts fresh and solid in the jar till next year.